Hi, I'm Gretchen Baskerville, the author of The Life-Saving Divorce, Hope for People Leaving Destructive Relationships. Now you may ask, what is a life-saving divorce? Well, it's the opposite of a frivolous or sinful or immature divorce. It's a divorce for very serious reasons, and life-saving divorces make up nearly half of divorces in America. And in my book, I give you plenty of evidence for that claim. If you want to learn more, you can follow me on Twitter, on Facebook, and check out my website, lifesavingdivorce.com. So today's question is, if I divorce, will I just end up with worse problems? Will my children be destroyed? Will I be homeless? Will I ever be happy again? Will I be disqualified from ever serving God again? Would divorce put a black cloud over my head for the rest of my life? Those are the big questions that go through any committed Christian's mind. The sad thing is that I've found many Christian pastors and counselors telling people that problems due to the divorce will be far worse than staying married, even in cases of domestic violence, chronic emotional abuse, adultery, neglect, sexual immorality, and substance abuse. For example, one pastor said in a sermon, "Divorce never makes anything better, it just gives you new problems." Notice the implication that those new problems stemming from divorce are just as destructive, or possibly even more destructive, than the abuse or betrayal in the marriage itself. When I emailed that pastor, he gave me his viewpoint. The pastor said, "Hey, crisis often leads couples to believe that the grass is greener in divorce," which it may be. Then the pastor said, "Divorce comes at a cost that few really understand or wrestle with." Then he said, "The pain of divorce lingers a very long time." And he suggested that one spouse may simply imagine the freedom that they will have once this difficult marriage is over. And he says that leaving a marriage can be just as much work as fixing the marriage, so why not stay and fight for the marriage? First, I want to say that I like this pastor. He's a great Bible teacher, so I'm not going to identify him. But this dear man is making several assumptions in how he approaches marital issues. First, the pastor is assuming the vast majority of marital problems aren't all that bad, at least not the ones he's seen. He doesn't sense that the spouse is in real danger. Certainly it's not destructive enough to divorce. But as I said at the outset, nearly half of divorces in the U.S. are for life-saving reasons, for very serious reasons. It's a pattern, not just a single crisis seemingly out of nowhere. We also know that fewer than half of church-going Christians confide in their pastor about their marital problems, according to Lifeway research. And to be fair to all the pastors and counselors out there, I would suggest that a couple or individual coming in for counseling won't tell you everything, especially if it involves criminal behavior. So the pastor really doesn't know what's going on behind closed doors. The church leader really doesn't know how miserable it is. Counselors, family, and friends don't get to decide because it's not their life. They've got no skin in the game. It's not their health, their kids, their sanity, their body, their wallet, or their safety. Assumption 2, that the person who wants out hasn't counted the cost. They haven't tallied up the financial and emotional toll of hiring a divorce attorney, arguing custody issues, haggling over child support and property division, not to mention the loneliness over the holidays. But I have a different view. In reality, if this has been a long, destructive marriage, logic tells us the opposite, that the very reason this horrific marriage has lasted so long is that the invested spouse, and I'm using Bob Hamp's phrase here, has counted the cost and now has finally decided that the cost of staying is much too high. This marriage is too destructive. And in life-saving situations, I would suggest that the pastor is the one who hasn't counted the cost. I guarantee you, the godly spouse who lives with abuse or betrayal 24/7 certainly has. Assumption 3, that it's less work to fix the marriage than to get divorced. Oh boy, well-meaning Christians often miss this point. They don't realize that in destructive marriages, one spouse is usually trying to make the marriage safe and loving and respectful, and the other one usually is not. The invested spouse has bent over backwards to fix the marriage. They've bought every Christian marriage book. They've followed every tip, altering their behavior to the extreme. They've struggled to find a counselor their spouse will see, and they've set appointments over and over for couples therapy. They've prayed, they've fasted, they've tried to be more submissive or sexually available or more agreeable. They've spent hundreds, if not thousands, on marriage retreats and marriage intensives. They've forgiven 70 times 7. They've gone the extra mile, and they've turned the other cheek repeatedly. They have given it 100%. And no matter what they've tried, no matter how they've debased themselves, this marriage is still destructive. The invested spouse cannot magically imbue the other spouse with godly traits. Even Judas, who spent years walking alongside Jesus, wasn't automatically made good. Assumption 4, that maybe a few divorcees find a better life, but most are unhappier after divorce and really regret not trying harder. Well, that's not entirely true either. According to a Baylor study, and remember, Baylor is the largest Baptist university in the U.S., the vast majority of Christian divorcees are happy or very happy after divorce. 7 in 10 Christian divorcees are happy with their life overall. Only 3 in 10 are not. Now let me give you another example. Here is some advice written by a Christian counselor to other counselors and pastors. This counselor is talking about sexually abused Christian wives who are being coerced into sex and even raped by their own husbands, which in many states is a felony. Let me highlight her key points. 1. This counselor says it's important for wives to make their own choices, especially considering that they are the ones who must live with the after effects. 2. But the counselor says something odd. Whether the abused wife stays, leaves, confronts, or remains quiet, her choices will lead to more pain. 3. The counselor says that pastors should provide wise options and pray through the choices and process potential outcomes. Now let's recap. That first point I agree with 100%. Those sexually abused wives should make their own decision because they are the ones who live with the after effects. But there's an implication that your pastor or counselor is a neutral third party who will inform you about the pros and cons of each choice before you make your own decision. And that's not always true for 2 key reasons. Sadly, our pastors often have an agenda, which is to save your marital status at any cost, even at the risk of your safety and well-being. And they often teach that if the godly spouse prays hard enough, God both can and will fix your marriage. Assumption 2. This counselor also says that all of the wife's choices will lead to more pain. So staying, leaving, confronting, or staying quiet will all be painful. And in the short term, that may be true, but we know that leaving an abuser will be difficult for a few years, but those who do it feel unbelievable relief. So what is this author really saying? Should wives just allow the rape and coercion and abuse to continue? Wait a second. What kind of mind game is that? It's just an unhelpful assessment. Of course it's painful to confront your abuser, and if you've never confronted your spouse and laid down a boundary, that's something you may want to try. And of course it's painful to leave and get a divorce. Of course the legal process is painful, but most divorces in America are over in less than a year. No one doubts that the divorce process is stressful, frightening, and expensive. But usually within 2 to 3 years, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and most families have slowly adjusted to the new normal and returned to their prior level of happiness. Assumption 3. Let's look at that claim, that it's the counselor's job to process potential outcomes, which to me means to evaluate the outcomes and warn the couple of what will happen based on the choices they make. On the surface, this sounds great. Who wouldn't want a neutral expert to help them weigh the pros and cons? The problem is that many well-meaning, caring Christian leaders are not experts. They are ill-informed, even misinformed, about the outcomes of divorce. In fact, many times they show you debunked studies, misrepresented information, and then end up fear-bombing you with tales of tragic outcomes. They don't know that nearly 8 in 10 kids turn out fine after divorce with no long-term serious emotional, social, or psychological problems. And we've known this since the 1980s. And similar studies have shown the same encouraging results over and over. They don't know that the vast majority of divorces finalize in less than a year, and within 2 years, most people's well-being starts to improve. But that's not what we were told. Yet study after study shows that. In other words, most people who got divorced felt truly awful at first, especially during the legal wrangling of the divorce process. But then they felt better and better over time. So the narrative that divorce ruins your life forever isn't what researchers found. These pastors and counselors also don't know what researchers at Kaiser Permanente found more than 20 years ago, that keeping children in abusive homes correlates with health problems in their adulthood. They don't know the study that shows that those who stayed in high distress 2-parent homes reported 10 times the damage to children than those who divorced. They don't know that 7 in 10 Christians are happy or very happy after divorce, as I mentioned before. They don't know that kids of single parents are not likely to have substance abuse problems or get expelled or suspended from school in their teen years. They don't know that your divorce won't automatically cause your children to divorce. They don't know that some anxiety, depression, and health problems may dissipate or disappear entirely when an abused husband or wife leaves and gets to safety. Also, pastors and counselors may not know what researchers have found, that after a long, destructive marriage, you're likely to be happier if you divorce, whether you remarry or choose to stay single, according to a 2005 study. I give details on these studies in chapters 7 and 10 of my book, The Life-Saving Divorce. So I hate to say it, but many pastors and counselors are giving out misinformation to people who really do need to get a life-saving divorce. What's the answer to today's question? If I divorce, will it just give me bigger problems? The answer is, if you need a life-saving divorce, your future is likely to be happier, calmer, and more peaceful once you get past that first difficult year. You may be poorer, you may have a smaller house, you may have to live with family or friends for a while. You may need to go back to work, get more education, and get a better job. You may need a lot of therapy and a support group to help you heal after abuse. but most abused or betrayed wives and husbands will tell you that they are happier today, and in reality, they regret not having left sooner. Let me read a note from one divorced woman. My dreams of the perfect marriage were shattered, but I am so much happier. I'm in a safe place and no longer fear what it might mean to me or my kids. I know my children are safe. I am not constantly criticized or belittled. And later she went on to say, I have learned to take a stand for what I know is right. I have learned that God will give me the strength I need to do the hard things as I learn to walk in obedience to Him. I have learned to look for the good in what God is doing, rather than to see only the brokenness. I have learned on a deeper level that God is good and His love for me is far beyond my wildest imagination.